Hello and welcome to my first video examining the book Missing 411 Western United States and Canada by the author David Paulides. We will go case by case, and the format will consist of me presenting the case as written, without any scrutiny, then with a review of any additional or contrary information that I am able to locate through my own research. My sources will be cited in the description below. All that said, let's jump in. Bart Schlayer. Bart, who was 49 years old at the time, went missing on Tuesday, September 14th, 2004, from Reed Lakes in the Yukon Territory in Canada. Bart's father, Otis, was an avid hunter, and he passed that passion down to Bart. The two would travel the world on different hunting excursions. He was, quote, hooked on the hunt, not the kill, close quote. To go along with his enjoyment of hunting, he graduated with a master's degree from Montana State University. His thesis was on bear activity in Yellowstone National Park and focused on how grizzly bears responded to human confrontation. He went on to work for the International Grizzly Bear Study at MSU. Many professionals came to know Bart as a leading expert in bear trapping. On December 14th, 2004, Bart arranged for a plane to take him to Reed Lakes. These lakes are approximately 110 miles east of the Alaska border, 5 miles from the nearest major highway, and 10 miles from the nearest town. The only way to access this area is by air. Bart's intention was to go bow hunting for 2 weeks, after which the plane would return to pick him up. He was well equipped for the task, although he did opt against carrying a firearm. He also had a tent with him, an inflatable raft, and a dry bag for his gear. On September 28th, the plane returned. The pilot did not see Bart, nor could he contact him on the radio. He looked for Bart a little and happened across the campsite. Bart's tent was knocked down either by animals or the weather, and Bart's pack was nearby. The pack contained bear spray, a radio for contacting the plane, and a knife. The pilot called out for Bart and searched briefly, but decided that something bad must have happened. He flew back out of the area and reported the disappearance to the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The RCMP search was brief. They did a flyover to look for Bart and then terminated the search. Bart's friends heard about the brevity of the search and decided to take matters into their own hands. They flew into the area and started a ground search. Across the lake from his camp, they found Bart's inflatable raft. Just inland of that, they found a bag of Bart's gear. Leaning on an adjacent tree was Bart's bow and a quiver of arrows. To the search party, it looked as if Bart had been sitting on the pack of gear, possibly calling moose. They searched a little more, and they found Bart's mask with a small amount of blood on it. They were, of course, alarmed by this, and they called for the RCMP again. This time, the RCMP set out in a grid search and eventually located, about 60 yards from the bow and pack, a skull and human bones. Also nearby was a significant amount of wolf and bear scat, a camera, and Bart's pants. The skull was later positively identified as Bart's via dental records. More concerning than what the RCMP found is what they did not find. There were no signs of a struggle. There was no blood trail from the body being moved. While there was human remains in the wolf and bear scat, no fabrics were located. This is unusual, since bears normally consume the clothing as well as the flesh of their prey. The rest of Bart's clothing was never found. Additionally, bears usually hide parts of their kills for later in a hidden cache. No such cache was ever located. All of Bart's family and friends agreed that he was in outstanding shape and would have fought for his life. Further, they believed that, given Bart's extensive experience, there was simply no way a bear could sneak up on him. That's not all that was odd. Bart's balaclava, the mask that his friends found, had no puncture or bite marks on it. Normally, bears go for bites to the head and neck. The coroner also confirmed that there were no puncture marks or bite marks on the skull to indicate that there was a bear attack. Lastly, why was Bart's pack undisturbed? It still had an indentation from him sitting on it. A bear would have gotten into the pack to search for food. I find it a little bit odd to say that Bart enjoyed the hunt but not the kill, as there are several pictures of him posing with corpses of various big game. Perhaps it's a hunter saying. Pilates spends much more time than usual on Bart's background than he does with most other cases. Whether this is because news articles for Bart are quite long and contain some of the same background as in Missing 411, or if this is because he's trying to build him up as some sort of infallible expert who would be immune to any mistakes or misadventure, is unclear. In the book, Pilates cites an expert that makes an interesting claim. Quote, "Bears don't consume people up here," close quote. That is a very odd thing to say, since the fact that bears ate at least part of Bart's body is perhaps the only thing that everyone seems to agree about. Even just one paragraph later, Pilates says that the expert doesn't dispute that at least part of Bart's body was consumed by a bear, so clearly bears do consume people there. Perhaps the point that the expert was trying to make is that bears don't kill people for the purpose of eating them. Even if that is true, that does not preclude a bear for killing Bart for other reasons. And that brings us to the crux of the matter. The point of contention is exactly how Bart died. From what I was able to find, the area where the remains were located did not show any signs of a struggle. What that does not mean, though, is that a struggle did not occur elsewhere and then the remains were brought to where they were found. Alternatively, it could have been a surprise attack, which coincidentally is exactly what Bart's friends thought when they initially found his belongings. Let's look at the signs of violence, since we don't have signs of a struggle. The pants that were found that belonged to Bart did not appear, quote, almost as though Bart had removed them, close quote, as claimed in the book, unless one imagines Bart to remove them with such force as to tear them up. Further, the face mask didn't just have a, quote, small amount of blood in it, close quote. It was shredded and had blood and hair in it. As for the lack of a blood trail, it had been 2 weeks. Bart likely died on the first day that he was there, and the weather had been bad for at least a few of those days. The weather is the reason cited by the RCMP for not searching more, in addition to not really knowing where to start. The articles that I've read report Bart's assumed last moments as one of 2 ways. Either he sat down to eat, or he sat down to call a moose. Either could have attracted a bear to his location. I've also seen the suggestion that an unexpected medical event, such as a heart attack or aneurysm, incapacitated or killed him before the bears or wolves even came along. One of his close friends also notes this possibility, saying that it had happened to another friend of his in that same age group. It should also be said that physical fitness does not necessarily make you immune to such sudden health issues. All of those things aside, I would agree with the coroner in this case. It is inconclusive how Bart died. That is, there is not enough remaining tissue and evidence to determine with any certainty the exact cause. Though, by the way, the coroner does say that there are bite marks, or more specifically, gnaw marks, on the bone. We can guess, hypothesize, and discuss, but we can't know for certain. What we can do, however, is simplify this to the most basic parts that we know are true. An accomplished outdoorsman goes bow hunting, alone, in a remote area. He leaves his knife, radio, and bear spray behind as he travels deeper into the woods to hunt. While sitting on his pack, his only weapon leaning against a nearby tree, he dies. Bears, wolves, and potentially other animals scavenge the remains, which destroy any evidence as to his actual cause of death. From here, Missing 411 returns to the format that we are pretty used to by now, of simply reporting very fast, sparsely detailed accounts for a while. So we have time for a few more cases today. Alma and Raymond Hall. Alma, who was 28 years old at the time, and her son Raymond, who was 6, went missing on Saturday, June 9, 1951, from Wath's Logging, Inglewood, Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Alma and her son went to visit the third member of their family, husband and father Thomas Glenn Hall, who was working on a logging camp near the Nimkish River. During their visit, Alma took Raymond on a hike to see a nearby waterfall. Others saw Alma and Raymond at the falls, but this would be the very last time that they were ever seen. Glenn was quickly aware of their disappearance, and he notified the RCMP. He also gathered a group of fellow loggers to search the area. The RCMP dragged the river while the others focused on land. The searches lasted a week, but no bodies were ever located. Alma's husband was not aware of the disappearance until the next day, since he was at a different site at the time. More importantly, the area around the falls were noted to be slippery and precipitous, which is why it was so widely believed that they had fallen in and drowned. Annie Puglis and Kenneth Coon. Annie, who was 43 years old at the time, went missing on Wednesday, April 19, 1967, from Alert Bay, Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Kenneth Coon, who is the great-nephew of Annie, disappeared less than 2 weeks later from the same area. Kenneth was just 5 years old at the time. The two were never found. Despite the coincidence of relation and time, it's noted in nearly every article that I read, the two disappearances are not likely linked. Linking the two is even less likely when you consider that Annie was apparently not residing in the area, but was just visiting someone at the time. Kenneth went missing while he was attending kindergarten, more specifically during lunch recess when he went out to play. Further, the day that Kenneth went missing, there was a massive storm and the tide was highest it had been that year. For some extra context, a third person was missing from that same area around that same time. Adrian Wadhams, a 4-year-old, was found to have been lodged beneath a wharf. Police determined that he had apparently fallen into the water and drowned. No foul play was suspected in that case, nor was it ever suspected in Kenneth or Annie's. Lynn Marie Hillier. Lynn, who was 2 years old at the time, went missing on Thursday, July 24th, 1986, from Horn Lake, Parksville, British Columbia. At the time of her disappearance, her grandparents had taken her with them on a short vacation to the family cabin on Horn Lake. The cabin itself is at the bottom of a small valley with a rocky road leading up to it. On the 24th, Lynn went outside and vanished. Her grandparents and parents searched, but they didn't find any evidence of her. They contacted the RCMP and a search was immediately started. 400 volunteers joined the search as well, but to no avail. Bloodhounds were brought in, but they could not or would not track. Air-to-ground infrared searches were also conducted, but still, there was no sign of Lynn. After a week of fruitless searching, a reward was posted by a great-grandparent for $25,000 for her return. Bernie, the same relative who had posted the reward, stated, quote, "I don't think she is here. She doesn't like water, and she doesn't wander." Close quote. After 10 days of finding nothing, the search was terminated. On August 19, 1986, two hunters were scouting for good locations about 3.5 miles from Hillier cabin. They spotted something under a log, and when they turned it over, they found Lynn's remains. This was reported to the RCMP, who notified the family. An officer stated that it was possible that Lynn had walked to the location where her body was found. A few days later, after hearing this statement made by the RCMP, Lynn's mother responded by saying that it just didn't seem possible that her Lynn would have walked up a mountain to her death. Another relative chimed in, saying that they didn't believe that Lynn walked there herself. A coroner's report found that Lynn had died on the second or third day of her being missing. The cause of death was ruled as exposure. This is one of the only cases ever reviewed by Pilates where FLIR was used but not successful, only to find the remains under an object that is penetrable by FLIR, such as a log. To address the last point first, thermal imaging cameras cannot penetrate objects. They only see the surface. So, if you were to hide under a log for a while, the camera would be able to see any part of you sticking out, and possibly some of the heat that transfers from your body to the ground and log around you. Even this has two assumptions. One, that any part of you sticking out is enough for a camera operator to identify. Two, that you're still alive and giving off heat. As such, it isn't overly mysterious that the infrared turned up nothing. Lynn was 2.5, according to papers that I saw. The difference of half a year may seem small. However, this difference is 25% older than her just being 2. As you can imagine, Lynn didn't simply disappear in front of her grandparents. Her grandparents had apparently left for a few minutes, leaving her alone, and it was during this time that she vanished. The statement made by Ernie about her not wandering away or liking water deserves a little more context. Just before this statement is recorded, the newspaper says why he is stating what he is. Quote, "Even police and family members admit that the only chance of finding her alive is if she has been the victim of abduction." Close quote. In other words, his belief is not necessarily based on evidence of her tendencies, but on the hope that she was still alive. A police sergeant at the time gave the opinion that there was not any evidence of abduction, but rather evidence pointed to her being somewhere out in the woods. Finally, in addition to the cause of death being exposure, it was stated many times across many articles that there were no signs of foul play, something that is left out of the book. William Elkinton. William, who was 7 years old at the time, went missing at 10 a.m. on Friday, February 15, 2008, from Tofino, Vancouver Island, British Columbia. William's parents, David and Camilla, had taken him and his brother Timothy with them on vacation to a bread and breakfast at Cable Cove Inn. The area is well known for being surrounded by many small islands, home to many of the First Nations people. On the morning of the 15th, David decided to take a walk on the rocky beach. William wanted to join him, so David took him along. They descended a set of outdoor steps together that led to a rocky beach of a cove. William stayed at the bottom of the stairs as his father walked the beach. David took his eyes off William for just a few minutes, but when he looked again, William was gone. He searched the beach area and the steps, but finding nothing, he contacted the inn operators, who, in turn, called the RCMP. The RCMP response was huge, including land, water, and air efforts. On the second day of the search, rainstorms hit the area, which hampered the search. A lush forest surrounds this area, which was searched as well. Nothing was ever found of William, not even clothing. It was noted in several reports that William loved water, and if he had gotten into the water of the cove, he would have been swept across the channel to a different island. This idea is given further evidence by the fact that some tracks of William's were found on the beach where he disappeared. This beach that he disappeared on is noted to be rocky, slippery, and rugged. In addition to the many islands, this area is also known for its large crashing waves. Yehudi Priority. Yehudi, who was 2 years old at the time, went missing on Monday, September 23, 1974, from Wild Duck Lake, Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Yehudi's father, William, took him to an old tribal area 4 miles north of the lake to pick berries. While William was picking berries, Yehudi suddenly disappeared. William searched the entire area, but when he couldn't locate his son, he contacted authorities. At the height of the search, more than 50 people aided by dogs and helicopters scoured the area. No evidence was found for nearly a week. On the 29th, Yehudi's remains were found, about 4 miles north of Wild Duck Lake, near Hope Creek. The lead searcher told the reporters that it seemed impossible that the boy had traveled so far. It appeared as though he had died from exposure. No further inquiry was made into his death. William was with another man, Coyote, at the time when his son went missing. Further, Yehudi did not suddenly go missing. He was being carried on the shoulders of William when he struggled, wanting to get down. His father let him down, and Yehudi took off into the woods, saying something about horses. William and Coyote assumed that he had gone to a nearby field that had horses in it, so they weren't concerned. They carried on up the trail for a while before crossing toward where Yehudi had gone about 5 minutes later. It was at this point when they thought that they heard Yehudi cry out. Quote, Prior says that he heard the horses whimpering and the child crying for about 2 minutes and then stopped. The two men wandered around for a long time, not being overly concerned that Yehudi was missing until an hour after dark. Remember that this excursion started around 3 p.m., and they didn't report that his son was missing until that evening. The following search didn't begin until the next day at noon. It was discovered that Yehudi had died the same night that he had gone missing, before the search had even begun. Due to the circumstances around the disappearance and death, there was an investigation to determine the fitfulness of Yehudi's parents, considering that he had a brother that was only 6 weeks old named Paulin. No blame fell on the parents at the end. Ultimately, it was determined that he likely followed a logging trail, and it was that helped him get so far away. He was covered in small scratches as well, which would corroborate the idea that he got where he was all on his own. Well, that's it for Chapter 1. Thank you for starting this new series with me. I hope that the change in format is a welcome one, but feel free to leave any feedback that you have in the comments. I'm still open to changing a lot of the format here as we move forward. We are sort of in an experimental stage. Until next time, take care.